Chapter 1. The carriage door closed. The rain fell like a curtain between Elena and the rest of the world, cold and unrelenting. She pressed her back against the stone wall of the abandoned coaching station, her cloak soaked through, her fingers numb. The last coach had left an hour ago, or perhaps two. Time had become slippery since she'd fled London, since she'd walked away from the wreckage of her engagement and the whispers that followed, jilted, ruined. Poor thing. She'd thought distance would silence them. Instead, the silence here was worse. A lantern swayed in the darkness ahead, illuminating the outline of a carriage. Black lacquer gleamed despite the rain, and the horses stood impossibly still, as if carved from shadow. No driver sat atop the bench, but the door hung slightly ajar, inviting. Elena's instincts whispered warnings she couldn't name. But the alternative was pneumonia. Or worse, the stretch of moorland between here and the next village was unforgiving. And night was deepening into something that felt less like darkness and more like appetite. She ran toward the carriage, her boots splashing through puddles, and hauled herself inside. The door slammed shut behind her. Elena spun, reaching for the handle. But it wouldn't yield. Her heart kicked against her ribs. "Hello?" Her voice sounded thin in the enclosed space. "Is anyone? You shouldn't be here." The voice came from the shadows opposite her, low and precise, each word edged with something that might have been warning or resignation. Elena's eyes adjusted slowly, and she saw him, a man sitting with perfect stillness. One long leg crossed over the other, his face half hidden by the fall of dark hair and the absence of light. "The door," Elena said, proud that her voice didn't shake. "It won't open." "I know." "Then open it." "No." The single word settled between them like a blade. Elena's pulse hammered in her throat. She could see more of him now, the sharp line of his jaw, the pale column of his throat above a high collar, the way his hands rested on his knees with a natural grace. Beautiful, she thought involuntarily, then immediately wondered why that word had come first. Before dangerous. "I'll scream," she said. "We're miles from anywhere. But if it makes you feel safer, scream." Elena didn't. Something about his tone suggested he wasn't mocking her, merely stating fact. She sank slowly onto the opposite bench, maintaining distance, her mind racing through possibilities. Kidnapping, robbery, worse things women weren't supposed to name in polite company. But he hadn't moved toward her, hadn't threatened. He simply watched her with eyes that caught the faint light from outside and reflected it back like a cat's. "Why won't you let me leave?" she asked. He was quiet for a long moment. The carriage swayed gently, as if moving, though Elena couldn't feel the jolt of wheels over road. "Because if you step out now, you'll walk directly into the hunting party tracking this vehicle. They'll assume you're with me. They'll kill you to hurt me, or they'll turn you to spite me. Either way, you die." Elena's mouth went dry. "That's insane." "Yes," he agreed. "But unfortunately true." She studied him more carefully now, looking for signs of delusion or intoxication, but his gaze remained steady and terribly lucid. "Who are you?" "No one you want to know." "That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting." Thunder rolled overhead, and Elena flinched. He didn't. She noticed then how little he moved, no fidgeting, no adjusting of position, no breath that she could see. Just that preternatural stillness. "You're not well," she said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. "No," he said. "I'm not." The admission surprised her. She leaned forward slightly, squinting in the darkness. "Are you injured?" "In a manner of speaking." "Let me help." "No." The word cracked through the space between them, sharp enough that Elena jerked back. He closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them again, something in his expression had shifted, become more carefully controlled. "I apologize, but you can't help me." "No mortal can." "Mortal." The word hung in the air like smoke. Elena's rational mind supplied explanations. Madman, fever dream, elaborate theatrical production. But her body knew better. Her instincts, honed by months of reading intention in drawing rooms and ballrooms, in the micro-expressions of people who smiled while they destroyed you, those instincts were screaming. "What are you?" she whispered. He smiled then, and it was the saddest thing she'd ever seen. "Cursed." Before Elena could respond, the carriage lurched violently. She was thrown forward, catching herself against the opposite bench against him. Her hands met his chest, solid and cold through the fabric of his shirt, and she gasped at the absence of heartbeat. He caught her wrists gently, his touch ice against her skin, and set her carefully back on her own seat. "They've found us," he said quietly. "Whatever happens next, stay inside this carriage." Do you understand? I don't understand anything, Elena. She froze. How do you know my name? But he was already moving, fluid as water, reaching for the door she'd been unable to open. It swung wide at his touch, revealing a night that had gone wrong somehow, to dark, to hungry. Filled with shapes that moved like men but felt like predators, he stepped out. And the last thing Elena saw before the door closed again was the way the shadows welcomed him. The way he became something other in the space between heartbeats. The sounds that followed would haunt her dreams, snarls, impacts, something that might have been screaming or might have been wind, and Elena, trapped in a locked carriage in the middle of nowhere, finally understood that the world was stranger and more terrible than she'd ever imagined. The door opened again 10 minutes later. He climbed back inside, his coat torn, dark stains she didn't want to identify spreading across the fabric. He met her eyes across the dim space. I'm sorry, he said, but you're not leaving. The carriage began to move, pulled by horses that made no sound, toward a destination Elena couldn't name. Chapter 2. The House of Night. Carriage rolled through darkness that seemed to thicken rather than thin as they traveled. Elena pressed herself against the corner of her seat, as far from him as the confined space allowed, watching him with a mixture of terror and unwilling fascination. He hadn't spoken since they'd begun moving. He sat with his head tilted back against the cushioned wall, eyes closed. The torn fabric of his coat revealing pale skin beneath skin that should have been bleeding but wasn't. The dark stains had stopped spreading. Elena had watched them, counting her own heartbeats, waiting for fresh blood that never came. You're staring, he said, without opening his eyes. You killed those men. Her voice emerged steadier than she'd expected. No, his eyes opened, fixing on her with unsettling intensity. I killed things that used to be men. There's a difference. What difference? Intent. They chose what they became. I didn't. Elena's hands twisted in her wet cloak. That doesn't make sense. Very little will. Going forward, he shifted slightly, wincing, the first sign of discomfort she'd seen from him. But you'll adapt. Humans always do. Stop calling me that. Human. As if you're not. She stopped, because finishing that sentence meant admitting things her rational mind still rejected. I'm not, he said quietly. Not anymore. The carriage turned sharply, and through the rain-streaked window, Elena glimpsed iron gates opening as if by invisible hands. Beyond them, a house rose from the moorland like a crown of stone, too large to be called merely a house, too austere to be welcoming. Gothic windows reflected no light. Towers pierced the low-hanging clouds. Where are we? Elena whispered. Blackthorn Hall, my prison. He paused. Now yours as well. I'm afraid. The carriage stopped. He exited first, moving with that inhuman grace, and stood waiting in the rain that didn't seem to touch him. Elena remained frozen, her last chance at refusal hovering on her lips. You can stay in there until dawn if you prefer, he said. But the carriage will return to the coach house whether you're ready or not, and I can't promise the horses will be gentle about it. Elena looked at the horses. They turned their heads in unison to stare at her with eyes that reflected red in the darkness. She scrambled out. He caught her elbow as she stumbled on the gravel drive, steadying her with that same careful, cold touch. This close, she could see the rain beating on his skin without soaking in, could smell something like old parchment and winter air, and beneath it, copper. This way. He released her and walked toward the massive front doors, which opened soundlessly at their approach. Inside, Blackthorn Hall was a study in shadows and candlelight. The entrance hall stretched impossibly high, lined with portraits whose subjects seemed to watch them pass. Candelabras burned without flickering, their flames too still to be natural. The air tasted of age and secrets. You'll want to dry off, he said, shrugging out of his ruined coat. Beneath it, his white shirt was pristine, no blood, no tears. Elena's stomach turned. There are rooms prepared on the second floor. East wing. Prepared? Elena forced herself to speak. You were expecting me? I was expecting someone. He draped the coat over a marble statue's outstretched arm. The house has a way of providing what's needed. The house, she's particular about guests. He started up the curved staircase, not checking to see if Elena followed. Don't enter any room marked with red wax on the threshold. Don't open windows after dark. Don't go into the west wing at all. Elena climbed after him, her wet skirts heavy. Why not? Because I'm asking you not to. That's not an answer. He turned so suddenly she nearly collided with him. In the candlelight, His face was impossible to read to beautiful to remote, like something carved and left to weather. Miss Thornwood, I've dragged you into a situation you didn't choose and can't escape. The least you can do is trust that when I set boundaries, they're for your protection, not my amusement. You still haven't told me what you are, Elena said, lifting her chin despite the fear singing through her veins. Or why those things were hunting you, or why I can't leave, or even your name. Something flickered across his expression, surprise, perhaps, or approval. You're braver than you were in the carriage. I'm angrier. Good. Anger is useful. He resumed walking, but slower now, as if allowing her to keep pace. My name is Lucian Ashford. I am or was the head of House Ashford, one of the 5 ruling houses of the Night Court. 3 months ago, I broke covenant law. Now House Mordain hunts me, and anyone I'm seen with becomes a target. Elena's mind raced, trying to parse meaning from words that sounded like fantasy. Night Court. You mean vampires, Miss Thornwood? I'm telling you that vampires are real, that they govern themselves through ancient law, and that you stepped into a carriage belonging to the most wanted among them. He stopped before a door carved with roses. This is your room. There's a bath drawn, clothes in the wardrobe, food on the table. Lock the door if it makes you feel safer, though it won't keep me out if I decide to enter. That's not comforting. It's not meant to be. It's meant to be honest. Lucian met her eyes, and for the first time, she saw something beyond control in his expression, something almost like regret. I won't hurt you, Elena, but I can't promise you won't be hurt because of me. I'm sorry you got into that carriage. I'm sorrier still that you can't leave until this is finished. Finished how? War. He said simply. House Mordain won't stop hunting until I'm dead or they are. Those are the only 2 endings this story has. He turned to leave, but Elena's voice stopped him. Why did you break their law? Lucian looked back, his profile sharp against the candlelight. Because I refused to kill an innocent to maintain political advantage. Because I remembered, briefly, what it felt like to be human. His smile was bitter. Sentiment is considered weakness among my kind. Weakness invites challenge. Challenge demands blood. He disappeared down the corridor, leaving Elena alone with a locked door she suddenly, desperately wanted to use, and questions multiplying faster than answers. Chapter 3. Habits of the undead. Elena didn't sleep. She'd bathed, changed into the inexplicably well-fitted nightgown she'd found in the wardrobe, and locked the door, as Lucian had suggested. Then she'd sat on the edge of the enormous four-poster bed, watching shadows shift across the ceiling, listening to the house breathe around her, because it did breathe. Blackthorn Hall had a rhythm, creaks and sighs that followed no pattern Elena could discern, distant sounds that might have been footsteps or settling stone or something else entirely. Once, she heard music, faint and melancholy, coming from somewhere below. It had stopped abruptly, as if someone had remembered they shouldn't be playing, when gray light finally bled through the heavy curtains. Elena rose and dressed in the simplest gown she could find, deep blue wool, high-necked, practical. Her own ruined clothes had vanished from where she'd left them, the house providing. She unlocked the door and stepped into the corridor. In daylight such as it was, filtered through perpetually clouded windows, Blackthorn Hall looked less menacing and more melancholy. Dust motes drifted through pale shafts of light. The portraits she'd noticed last night depicted stern-faced individuals in clothing spanning centuries, all sharing the same unsettling quality. Their eyes seemed aware. Elena found the stairs and descended, following the scent of bread and tea to what she hoped was a kitchen or breakfast room. Instead, she discovered a library, floor-to-ceiling shelves groaned with books in a dozen languages. A fire burned in the hearth despite no visible servants to tend it, and at a table near the windows, surrounded by scattered papers and open volumes, sat Lucian. He looked up as she entered, and Elena's breath caught Dot in the darkness of the carriage and the candlelit corridors. She'd thought him pale. Now she understood. He wasn't pale so much as luminous, as if lit from within by moonlight rather than sun. His dark hair fell across his forehead, and the morning light, what little penetrated the clouds, made his eyes appear almost amber. He looked impossibly young and infinitely old at once. You should be asleep, Elena said, then felt foolish. Or do you not sleep? Lucian closed the book before him. I do. But not as you understand it. Daylight makes me sluggish, vulnerable. Most of my kind retreat to sealed chambers during these hours. He gestured to the windows. The clouds help. Direct sunlight would be unpleasant, Elena repeated. You mean fatal, eventually. He stood, moving to a sideboard where tea and food had been laid out. You didn't eat last night. I wasn't hungry. It was a lie. She'd been starving, but the thought of eating in this house, accepting its hospitality, had felt too much like surrender. Stubborn, he poured tea with movements that were too precise, too controlled, as if he had to remember how to perform human gestures. Eat now, or I'll assume you're trying to make yourself weak out of some misguided attempt at martyrdom. Elena bristled. I'm not. You are actually. He set the teacup down in front of the chair nearest the fire farthest from the windows. She noticed. An invitation or a command? You're punishing yourself for something, though I haven't determined what yet. The broken engagement, perhaps. Or whatever drove you to flee London in the first place. Heat flooded Elena's cheeks. You know nothing about me. I know you got into a stranger's carriage in a storm, rather than wait for proper transport. I know. You asked if I was injured before you asked if I was dangerous. I know you're angry at yourself more than you're afraid of me. Lucian returned to his seat, watching her with those unsettling eyes. Am I wrong? Elena wanted to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she moved to the chair he'd indicated and picked up the teacup with hands that trembled slightly. The tea was perfect, the exact temperature and sweetness she preferred. The house, she said, reads its guests. Blood magic. Very old. Don't worry, it only takes surface thoughts. Preferences? Comforts. Nothing deeper. He paused. Unless you invite it deeper. I won't. Wise. He returned his attention to the papers before him, and Elena found herself studying him in the firelight. His stillness was absolute, no fidgeting, no unconscious adjustments. Even his chest didn't rise and fall with breath. Do you have to remember? She asked suddenly. Lucian looked up. Remember what? To breathe, to blink, to move like, she gestured vaguely, like something alive. His expression shifted, surprise giving way to something that might have been respect. Yes, he said quietly. The body forgets its old rhythms. If I don't concentrate, I slip into the stillness. It unsettles humans. It's unsettling even when you're trying. I know. He closed the book again, giving her his full attention. You have questions. Ask them now, while I'm coherent. As the day progresses, I'll become less myself. Elena set down her teacup. How long have you been this way? 243 years. I was turned during the French Revolution, though not in France. Turned. You mean made into a vampire? Yes. By whom? Someone I trusted. His voice hardened. She's dead now. Elena absorbed this, her academic curiosity warring with horror. And the night court? The houses? A governing structure established after the blood wars of the 15th century. 5 houses, each controlling territory and bloodlines. We have laws, strict ones. Feeding requires consent or compensation. Turning humans requires approval from the High Council. Killing innocents is forbidden. He smiled without humor. Though innocent is interpreted loosely, but you broke the law. I refuse to execute a human who witnessed a feeding. House Mordain's feeding specifically. They claimed he was compromised, that he'd sell our secrets. I investigated and found he was a terrified gardener who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Lucian's hands tightened on the table edge. I offered sanctuary instead of death. Mordain declared me traitor. Where is he now? The gardener? Safe. Hidden where even the night court can't reach him. Lucian's gaze held hers. That's why they hunt me so viciously. Not because I broke the law, but because I succeeded. I proved that humans don't have to die for our convenience. It sets a dangerous precedent. Elena felt something shift in her chest, a grudging admiration for this creature who should have been monster. You're protecting him still. I'm trying. Lucian's expression grew distant, and Elena noticed how the light seemed to drain from his face as the morning progressed. But they found my carriage. They know someone witnessed our fight. They'll assume it's you. Then what do we do? The word we hung between them, and Elena saw the moment Lucian registered it, the moment she'd stopped being his captive and become something else. We survive, he said softly, until I can find a way to end this that doesn't end you. Chapter 4. Small Mercersby midday. Lucian had grown alarmingly still. Elena had remained in the library. Partly from curiosity about the books, some appeared older than any she'd seen in London's museums, and partly because leaving felt like abandoning him. Which was absurd, given that he was her captor, her jailer. The reason she couldn't return to her life, except he'd begun to feel less like a jailer and more like a fellow prisoner. He sat unmoving in his chair, head tilted back, eyes closed. Only the faint tension around his mouth suggested consciousness. The papers before him lay forgotten, covered in what appeared to be maps and correspondence written in languages Elena couldn't identify. Lucian? She spoke softly, unsure if he could even hear her. His eyes opened slowly, as if the lids weighed more than they should. Still here. Should you go to your chambers? You said daylight makes you vulnerable. Can't. The word emerged roughly, watching the perimeter. If Mordane's trackers get close, I'll know. Elena frowned. How? The house tells me. Blood magic, remember? He managed a weak smile. Don't worry. This passes when the sun sets. But the sun wouldn't set for hours yet, and watching him suffer if vampires could suffer made something ache in Elena's chest. She rose, moving to examine the books on the nearest shelf. Medical texts, most of them outdated, but some dealt with obscure topics, blood diseases, transfusion theories, anatomical studies from the Renaissance, looking for stakes and holy water. Lucian's voice held faint amusement. Looking for how to help you. You can't. You keep saying that. Elena pulled down a volume titled Theories of Vitality and Absence. But you also keep assuming I'll simply accept it. Stubborn, he murmured again. But this time it sounded almost affectionate. Elena returned to her chair and opened the book, scanning pages of dense Latin text. Her education had been thorough. Her father had believed women should be as learned as men, a radical notion that had made her both fascinating and unmarriageable to London society. Now that knowledge felt useful for the first time in months. It says here that those afflicted with sanguis mortem dead blood experience heightened sensitivity to solar influence, she read aloud. Symptoms include lethargy, weakness, and diminished cognitive function during daylight hours. Flawless description of my current state, but it also mentions palliative measures. Elena looked up. Something about iron and darkness? Can the curtains be drawn more completely? Lucian's eyes had closed again. Try. Elena moved to the windows, examining the heavy velvet drapes. They were drawn, but gaps allowed slivers of gray light through. She found additional panels hidden in the wall cavities and pulled them across, sealing the room into near total darkness. The fire provided the only illumination now, casting everything in warm amber. When she turned back, Lucian's posture had eased slightly. Better? She asked. Yes. He opened his eyes, and in the firelight they gleamed like a cat's. Thank you. The gratitude in his voice caught Elena off guard. She returned to her chair, suddenly aware of how intimate this felt, sealed together in firelit darkness, the rest of the world held at bay. Dangerous territory for a ruined woman and a vampire who'd admitted he couldn't let her leave. The iron? Elena prompted, redirecting her thoughts. Old superstition with roots in truth. Iron disrupts certain magical frequencies. Some of my kind find it grounds them during daylight. He paused. There's a jewelry box in the East Wing sitting room. Third drawer. Bring it here. Elena hesitated. You're trusting me to wander your house? You're trusting me not to drain you while you sleep. Seems fair. The casual acknowledgement of that possibility should have terrified her. Instead, Elena found herself rising, taking a candelabra from the mantel, and venturing into the corridor. Blackthorn Hall felt different in daylight, less menacing, more sorrowful. She passed rooms filled with furniture draped in white sheets, galleries where paintings watched her progress, a music room containing a pianoforte covered in dust. The house had been grand once, lived in and loved. Now it felt like a mausoleum. She found the sitting room easily. It faced east, and weak afternoon light made the space almost cheerful. The jewelry box sat exactly where Lucian had described, rosewood inlaid with mother of pearl, beautiful and clearly old. Inside, Elena found what appeared to be mourning jewelry, black stones, iron settings, delicate chains. A locket caught her eye, iron filigree surrounding a miniature portrait of a young woman with dark hair and laughing eyes, human eyes. Elena's chest tightened. She closed the box and carried it back to the library, questions multiplying with each step. Lucian hadn't moved. Elena set the box on the table beside him and watched as he opened it with fingers that trembled slightly. Weakness or emotion, she couldn't tell. He withdrew a simple iron ring and slipped it onto his left hand. The effect was immediate. Color such as it was returned to his face. His breathing, which Elena hadn't realized had stopped, resumed in shallow pulls. Better, he confirmed, flexing his hand. Then he noticed what she held, the locket which she'd apparently carried separately without thinking. His expression shuddered. You should put that back. Who was she? Someone I failed. He closed the jewelry box with more force than necessary. A long time ago, but Elena had seen enough grief in mirrors to recognize it in others. Someone you loved. Lucian's silence was answer enough. Elena set the locket down gently between them, not prying, not pushing, just acknowledging. Then she returned to her chair and her book, giving him privacy in the only way possible when sharing a sealed, darkened room. They sat in companionable quiet as the afternoon crawled past. Elena read about blood magic and ancient curses, while Lucian recovered enough to sort through his papers. Once, she looked up to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't interpret: surprise, perhaps, or confusion, as if she'd done something unexpected. "What?" she asked. "You're still here. You locked the carriage doors. I meant in this room. With me. You could have stayed in your chambers. Locked the door. Avoided me entirely." He tilted his head, studying her. "Why haven't you?" Elena considered the question honestly. "Because you look lonely," she said finally. "And I know what that feels like." Something cracked in Lucian's carefully controlled expression just for a moment, just enough for Elena to glimpse the man beneath the monster. The one who'd chosen mercy over law. The one who'd spent 2 centuries protecting a house that felt like a tomb. The one who'd put on an iron ring because she'd asked him to try. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For the darkness. For the iron. For staying." Elena nodded, her throat suddenly tight. "You're welcome." Outside, storm clouds gathered again, and somewhere in the distance, something howled. Chapter 5. Blood on the doorstep. Night fell like a curtain lifting. One moment Lucian was still present but diminished, like a painting faded by sun. The next, as true darkness claimed Blackthorn Hall, he simply was again, full and vital and so intensely alive that Elena's breath caught. He stood in one fluid motion, stretching with unconscious grace. "Better," he said, and his voice held none of the earlier weakness. "Much better." Elena had dozed in her chair, the book fallen open in her lap. Now she jolted awake, disoriented. By the complete darkness the fire had burned low, and by Lucian's sudden proximity. He'd moved to the windows and drawn back the curtains she'd closed, revealing a moonless night. "They're coming," he said quietly. Elena's drowsiness evaporated. "House Mordain. Scouts. 3 of them, maybe 4. Testing our defenses." He turned from the window, and his eyes caught the dying firelight in a way that was distinctly inhuman. "Stay in this room. Lock the door after I leave. Don't open it for anyone, even if they sound like me." "What are you going to do?" "Keep them from getting inside." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Elena, if something happens to me, if they break through, there's a passage behind the bookcase on the north wall. It leads to the stables. Take the gray mare. Ride east. There's a village 5 miles out. Find the church. Tell the priest that Lucian Ashford sent you, that you need sanctuary until dawn. The church will help me. Father Marcus is aware of our kind. He'll protect you." Lucian's expression hardened. "Promise me you'll run if it comes to that." Elena stood, her hands clenched in her skirts. "I promise." "But Lucian, yes? Don't die." The words hung between them, too earnest, too revealing. Lucian's expression softened into something Elena had never seen from him before: warmth, real and unguarded. "I'll try," he said. And then he was gone. Elena locked the door with shaking hands and returned to the window. At first she saw nothing but darkness and the wild grounds beyond. Then movement, shapes flowing across the lawn like oil, too fast to be human, too coordinated to be animal. 4 of them, all dressed in black, all moving with Lucian's same inhuman grace. They surrounded the house in a pattern that spoke of military precision, and Elena felt her pulse hammer in her throat. This wasn't a random attack. This was a strategy. The front doors burst open with a sound like thunder. Elena pressed against the wall beside the window, watching the entrance hall below. Lucian appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the darkness beyond, facing the intruders with his hands loose at his sides. "Mordain's dogs," he said, his voice carrying with unnatural clarity. "You're trespassing. You're harboring the human from the road." The speaker stepped forward, a woman with white blonde hair and a smile that promised cruelty. "Surrender her. We'll make your end quick. She's under my protection." "You have no authority to grant protection, traitor. You broke covenant. You have no house, no rights, no mercy." "Coming." The woman's smile widened. "We'll find her anyway. After we've dealt with you. Then come deal with me." What followed happened too quickly for Elena's human eyes to fully track. The 4 attackers moved as one, blurring across the entrance hall. Lucian met them with violence that was both beautiful and horrifying, precise, economical, devastating. Bodies collided with walls hard enough to crack stone. Blood black in the low light spattered across marble floors, but 4 against 1, even one as old and skilled as Lucian, was mathematics that didn't favor survival. Elena watched him falter, watched claws rake across his shoulder, watched him drop to one knee. The blonde woman laughed, raising something that gleamed silver. Elena didn't think. She grabbed the iron poker from beside the fireplace, unlocked the door, and ran. Elena, no! Lucian's shout was cut off as another attacker slammed him against a pillar. Elena reached the entrance hall, her heart a drum against her ribs, and swung the poker with all her strength at the nearest vampire, a dark-haired man who'd been moving to flank Lucian. The iron connected with his temple, and he shrieked, reeling back with smoke rising from the wound. Iron disrupts magical frequencies. You little. The blonde woman turned on Elena with eyes gone completely black, pupils blown wide with fury. Lucian moved faster than thought. He caught the woman mid-lunge, throwing her across the hall with enough force that she crashed through a side table. Touch her and I'll burn this entire house down around us, he snarled. The remaining attackers paused, reassessing. Elena stood with the poker raised, breathing hard, positioned back to back with Lucian without consciously deciding to do so. Interesting, the blonde woman said, rising from the wreckage. Blood trickled from her mouth, black, viscous. The human has teeth. How quaint. She glanced at her companions. Withdraw, for now, coward. Lucian spat. Strategist, she corrected. We know she's here now. We know she'll fight for you. That makes her leverage, Ashford. Her smile was all poison. We'll be back, with more, and next time, we'll take her alive, so you can watch what we do to her. Then they were gone, bleeding into shadows, leaving only destruction and the copper-sweet stench of vampire blood behind. Lucian turned to Elena, his face a mask of fury and fear. What were you thinking? That you were about to die? Elena's hands shook so badly the poker rattled. That I made a promise. You promised to run, no? I promised not to let you die. She dropped the poker, her legs suddenly water. There's a difference. Lucian stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. Then he laughed, sharp and disbelieving. You're insane, probably. Elena's vision swam. Is it over? For tonight. He caught her as her knees buckled, lifting her with ease despite his own injuries. But they'll return, Elena, in greater numbers, with worse intentions. Then we'd better prepare, Elena said, and passed out in his arms. When she woke, she was back in her room, tucked into bed with her boots removed. Lucian sat in a chair by the door, covered in blood, his and others watching over her with eyes that held something new, something like respect. Chapter 6. The weight of truth. Elena woke to candlelight and the lingering scent of copper. Lucian still sat in the chair by her door. Though he'd changed clothes, gone were the blood-soaked garments, replaced by clean black. His hair was damp, suggesting he'd bathed. But exhaustion lined his face in ways she hadn't seen before. As if the night's battle had cost him more than physical strength. You should have run, he said, without preamble. Elena pushed herself upright, her head pounding. We've established that I didn't. You could have died. Very easily. Very painfully. His voice was carefully controlled, but anger simmered beneath. That iron poker might have bought you seconds, Elena. Seconds before they tore you apart to punish me. But they didn't, because I stopped them. This time, Lucian leaned forward, firelight casting his face in sharp relief. Do you understand what you've done? They saw you fight for me. Now you're not just a witness, you're an ally. A conspirator. When they return, they won't simply kill you. They'll make an example of you. Elena's stomach turned, but she kept her voice steady. Then teach me. Teach you what? How to survive this. How to fight them. How to be useful instead of helpless. She met his eyes across the dimly lit room. You said this ends in war. Fine, make me a soldier. Lucian stared at her as if she'd suggested learning to fly. You're human, Elena. Fragile, mortal. No amount of training changes that. No, but knowledge does. Strategy does. Elena swung her legs over the side of the bed, ignoring the wave of dizziness. You've spent 2 centuries learning their weaknesses. Teach me. Give me a chance to protect myself when you can't be there. If I can't be there, you're already dead. The blunt words hung in the air between them. Elena absorbed them, along with the fear behind Lucian's anger, fear for her. She realized. Not of her, or because of her, but for her. Then why am I still alive? She asked quietly. You could have locked me in a cellar, kept me sedated, hidden me away where I couldn't interfere. She paused. But you haven't. You've let me wander your house, sit with you. You trusted me to bring you iron when you were vulnerable. Why? Lucian's jaw tightened. For a long moment he said nothing, and Elena thought he might refuse to answer. Then he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Because you make me remember what it was like to be human. To care about someone beyond strategy or survival. He looked away. I've been alone for so long, Elena. This house, these halls, they're a monument to everyone I've failed to protect. Every human I've watched grow old and die. Every ally I've lost to the night court's politics. I stopped letting people close because it was easier than mourning them. And now? Now you've barged into my carefully constructed isolation and demanded I care again. His smile was bitter. You're terrifying. Elena felt something crack open in her chest, something that had been locked tight since the day her fiancé had called off their wedding in front of half of London society. Since the whispers had started. Since she'd learned that the world was crueler than she'd believed. I'm not the one who's terrifying, she said. You're ancient and powerful, and you still choose mercy. That's what frightens them. That's why they hunt you. She stood on unsteady legs. You make them question whether being monsters is necessary. Lucian rose as well, moving to the window. Dawn was still hours away, but Elena could sense his awareness of time passing, of daylight approaching, and with it, vulnerability. The human I saved, he said suddenly. The gardener. His name was Thomas. 23 years old, engaged to be married, terrified out of his mind when Mordane's people cornered him. Lucian's hands braced against the window frame. They wanted me to kill him as proof of loyalty, to show that human lives meant nothing compared to vampire secrecy. But you refused. I refused. I investigated his background, confirmed he was innocent, and spirited him away to a monastery in Scotland where the night court has no reach. He turned back to face her. I thought I was being merciful. Instead, I started a war. Because if one human can be saved, why not all of them? If consent matters for feeding, why not for everything else? The entire structure of the night court is built on the assumption that we're superior, that human lives are currency. I challenged that. Elena moved closer, drawn by the rawness in his voice. You did the right thing, did I? Thomas is safe, but how many others have died because Mordane decided to make an example of me? How many humans have been killed in the skirmishes? How many will die before this is finished? His expression was anguished. Sometimes I think I should have just ended Thomas, quickly. One death to prevent dozens. No, Elena's voice came out fiercer than she'd intended. Don't you dare. One person's life has value, Lucian. You can't sacrifice it just because the alternative is harder. Even if the alternative gets you killed? The question hung between them, weighted with meanings Elena wasn't ready to examine. She stepped closer still, until she stood within arm's reach of him, close enough to see the inhuman stillness he couldn't quite hide. The way he watched her pulse jump in her throat. I'm already at risk, she said quietly. I got into that carriage. I stayed in this house. I picked up that poker. Those were my choices, not yours. She paused. Stop treating me like I'm made of glass. You're made of flesh and blood, Lucian said roughly, both of which are very easy to spill. Then teach me how to avoid spilling them. They stood facing each other in the candlelit room, and Elena watched Lucian wage some internal battle. Finally, he nodded. 3 rules, he said. First, you do exactly as I say in combat. No exceptions. Second, you never engage a vampire alone. Your only goal is survival until I can reach you. Third, if I tell you to run, you run. No heroics. Agreed. I mean it, Elena. This isn't a negotiation. I said agreed. She held out her hand. Do we have a deal? Lucian looked at her outstretched hand for a long moment. Then he took it, his skin cold against hers, his grip, careful as if afraid he might break her just by touching. We have a deal, he said. God help us both. Chapter 7. Lessons in the dark training began the next night. Lucian led Elena to the ballroom, a vast space on the ground floor that had clearly once hosted elegant gatherings but now stood empty. Furniture pushed to the walls. Floor scuffed and worn. Candles burned in iron sconces, casting long shadows that danced with their movements. First lesson, Lucian said, circling her slowly. Vampires are faster than you, stronger than you, and they heal from almost anything. You cannot win a direct confrontation. Your only advantages are surprise, strategy, and exploiting our weaknesses. Elena turned to track his movement, her heart already racing. You mentioned iron. Iron disrupts our ability to heal and causes pain disproportionate to the actual damage. A shallow iron cut feels like being flayed alive. He stopped in front of her. You also have silver, though that's more myth than reality. It burns, but no worse than iron. Fire works if you can manage it. Decapitation is permanent. A stake through the heart only paralyzes us until it's removed. That's less helpful than stories suggest. Most vampire lore is propaganda we spread ourselves. Keeps humans looking for the wrong solutions. Lucian moved to a trunk against the wall and withdrew what looked like a slender dagger with an iron blade. But some of it is true. We can't enter a home without invitation. Running water weakens us. And yes, sunlight is fatal, though the speed depends on age and strength. He handed her the dagger. Elena took it, feeling the weight, the balance. The hilt was wrapped in leather, kept her skin from touching the iron. Why doesn't this hurt you? She asked. Leather barrier. Also, I've built up tolerance over time. Most vampires avoid iron entirely. I've made it a study. He stepped back, assuming a ready stance. Now, try to stab me. Elena blinked. What? You need to understand how fast we move, how we read human telegraphs. Attack me. Elena hesitated, then lunged forward with the dagger. Lucian sidestepped so quickly he blurred, and suddenly he was behind her, his hand gentle on her wrist. You broadcast your intention, he said, near her ear. Your eyes fixed on my chest before you moved. Your weight shifted forward. Your breathing changed. To us, you might as well have announced your attack. He released her and moved back to his starting position. Again, they repeated the exercise a dozen times. Each time, Lucian avoided her easily, offering corrections. Don't look where you're aiming. Keep your breathing steady. Move from your center, not your shoulders. By the 13th attempt, Elena was sweating and frustrated. She feinted left, then struck right and felt the dagger nick fabric before Lucian caught her wrist. Better, he said, and she heard approval in his voice. You're learning to lie with your body. That's essential. They moved on to defensive techniques. Lucian taught her where to strike to cause maximum damage: eyes, throat, joints. How to use an attacker's momentum against them. How to recognize when a vampire was about to feed versus fight. The eyes change, he explained. Pupils dilate, sometimes to the point where the iris disappears entirely. If you see that, run immediately. They're in feeding frenzy. Rational thought is gone. What about you? Elena asked. Do your eyes change? Lucian's expression shuddered. Yes. Show me. Elena, show me, she insisted. If I'm going to survive this, I need to know what to watch for. Even in you. The last words came out softer than she'd intended, and Lucian flinched as if struck. But after a moment, he nodded. Look at me. Elena met his gaze, amber in the candlelight, still human enough to pass for mortal. Then she watched as something shifted behind his eyes. The pupils expanded, swallowing the iris until his eyes became pools of black with only a thin ring of gold remaining. His lips parted slightly, revealing teeth that had become sharp enough to tear flesh. Elena's instinct screamed to run, but she forced herself to stand still, to study him, to see the monster beneath the man who'd sat with her in the library, who'd thanked her for iron and darkness, who'd been kind even when being cruel would have been easier. It doesn't change who you are, she said quietly. Lucian's eyes returned to normal so quickly Elena might have imagined the transformation. He turned away, his shoulders tense. You don't know who I am. I know you chose mercy over politics. I know you've spent 2 centuries protecting a house full of ghosts. I know you're afraid of hurting me, even while you're training me to survive. Elena stepped closer. I know enough. You know the best parts. The parts I've curated for you. His voice was rough. You haven't seen me feed, Elena. Haven't seen what I become when the hunger takes over. Haven't watched me drain someone until their heart stops. Have you? Drained someone until they died? The silence stretched between them, weighted and terrible. Once, Lucian said finally, a long time ago, before I understood control. He turned back to face her, and his expression was haunted. I was newly turned, starving, and she smelled like everything I'd ever wanted. By the time I realized what I was doing, it was too late. She was 17 years old. Her name was Catherine. Elena's throat tightened. The locket, in the jewelry box. Yes. He closed his eyes briefly. I spent the next century learning control. learning to feed without killing, to take only what's freely given. But I can never undo Catherine. She's always there, reminding me what I'm capable of if I slip. Elena understood then the careful distance he maintained, the iron ring he wore, the rules and restrictions he imposed on himself. Not because he was inherently good, but because he knew he was capable of terrible things and chose every day not to become them. Thank you, she said. Lucien's eyes opened. For what? For telling me the truth. For trusting me with it. She picked up the iron dagger again. Now teach me more. Because if Mordane's people return, I want to be ready. Something shifted in Lucien's expression, gratitude, perhaps, or relief that she hadn't run screaming. Then we continue, he said. But, Elena, if you ever feel unsafe with me, if I ever frighten you, you tell me immediately. Promise, I promise. They trained until dawn approached and Lucien began to slow, his movements losing their supernatural precision. Elena was exhausted, covered in bruises from falls and near misses, but something had changed between them, a foundation of trust, built on honesty and shared fear. Chapter 8. The Sigety came 3 nights later, and they didn't come quietly. Elena was in the library, reading about vampire bloodlines and house hierarchies by candlelight, when the windows exploded inward. Glass shattered across the floor like diamonds, and dark shapes poured through the openings with inhuman speed. She grabbed the iron dagger Lucien had insisted she keep close and dove behind the heavy reading table. Her heart slammed against her ribs, but her hands were steady. 3 nights of training had taught her body to move before fear could paralyze her. Lucien, she shouted, then cursed herself. Don't give away your position. But he was already there, materializing in the doorway with speed that defied physics. His eyes met hers across the chaos, human still, controlled, and he gave a sharp nod. Stay down. 6 vampires flooded the library. Elena recognized the blonde woman from before, the leader and 5 others, all moving with predatory grace. This wasn't a scouting party. This was an execution squad. Ashford, the blonde woman smiled, her teeth gleaming. You've kept us waiting. How rude. Cordelia. Lucien's voice was ice. House Mordane sends its lapdog. I'm flattered. Lord Mordane sends his regards. And his command, surrender the human, submit to judgment, and your death will be swift. Cordelia's gaze swept the room, searching. Refuse, and we'll tear this house apart, stone by stone, until we find her. Then we'll make you watch what we do before we end you both. Counter offer, Lucien said pleasantly. Leave now, and I'll only kill half of you. Cordelia laughed, and then they attacked. Elena watched from behind the table, tracking movements as Lucien had taught her. Count them. Identify patterns. Look for the weak one. 3 vampires engaged Lucien directly, while 2 others fanned out, searching. Cordelia hung back, directing the assault with hand signals. One of the searchers, a thin man with silver hair, moved toward Elena's hiding spot. She saw his nostrils flare, sending her. Damn, she'd forgotten vampires could track by smell. He rounded the table, grinning. There you. Elena lunged upward, driving the iron dagger toward his throat. He jerked back with inhuman reflexes, but the blade caught his shoulder. He screamed a high, agonized sound and smoke rose from the wound. Elena didn't wait. She kicked the table forward with all her strength, catching him off balance, and ran for the door. Survive until Lucien can reach you. Never engage alone. But the second searcher cut her off, a woman with dark skin and faster reflexes than the first. She caught Elena by the throat, lifting her off the ground with one hand. Little human with an iron toy, she purred. How adorable. Elena couldn't breathe. Black spots danced across her vision. She still held the dagger, but her arms felt weak, useless. The eyes. Go for the eyes. She drove the blade upward with desperate strength. It caught the vampire's cheek, missing the eye, but tearing a smoking furrow across her face. The woman shrieked and dropped Elena, who hit the floor gasping. Then Lucien was there, a blur of controlled violence. He caught the injured woman and threw her through the remains of the window with enough force that Elena heard bones crack. The silver-haired male fled, clutching his smoking shoulder, but 4 remained, and Lucien was bleeding from a dozen wounds. The girl has spirit, Cordelia observed from her position near the fireplace. Pity to waste it. Tell me, human, would you like to live forever? Join us, and we'll turn you. Become what he is. It's better than dying. Don't listen to her, Lucien said, his voice strained. Blood black and viscous dripped from a gash across his ribs. Mordane would never honor that offer. Perhaps not. Cordelia agreed. But it's fun to watch hope bloom before we crush it. Elena pulled herself upright, her throat bruised, her hands shaking. She still gripped the dagger. Around her, the library, beautiful, ancient, full of knowledge, lay in ruins. Glass glittered across torn books. Blood stained the Persian carpet. The house that had felt like a sanctuary was becoming a tomb. No, Lucian, Elena called. The house. You said it has blood magic. He was fighting two vampires simultaneously, barely holding them back. What? The house protects its occupants. You said so. Old magic. She remembered the tea that appeared at the perfect temperature, the clothes that fit exactly right, the way doors opened and closed according to need. Can you activate it? Lucian's eyes widened with understanding. Not while I'm fighting. I need concentration, then I'll buy you time. Elena raised the dagger, positioning herself between Lucian and Cordelia. Her entire body screamed that this was suicide, but Lucian had taught her something important. Vampires expected humans to be helpless. Surprise was her only weapon. Bold, Cordelia said, amused. But stupid. Probably, Elena agreed. Then she grabbed a candelabra from the nearby table and hurled it at Cordelia's face. The vampire dodged easily, but the motion put her off balance for half a second. Elena used that moment to overturn the bookshelf behind her, sending centuries of knowledge crashing down in Cordelia's path. It wouldn't stop her, but it might slow her. Behind Elena, Lucian had dropped to one knee, his hands pressed flat against the floor. His lips moved in words Elena couldn't hear. Latin, maybe, or something older. The air pressure in the room changed, thickening. The house began to respond. It started with the doors, slamming shut with force that shook the walls. Then the windows, the broken ones and whole ones alike, sealed themselves with shadows that looked solid, impenetrable. The candles flared brighter, their flames turning blue. What? Cordelia stumbled, her confidence cracking. The floor buckled beneath the attacking vampires, wood splintering upward like teeth. The walls pressed inward. The house itself had become a trap, and they were caught inside it. Blackthorn Hall has stood for 300 years, Lucian said, his voice resonating with power. She's tasted more vampire blood than you can imagine. And she's hungry. The shadows reached for Cordelia and her companions with something like appetite. Elena watched, transfixed and terrified, as the house her captor called home proved itself a far more dangerous monster than any vampire. Chapter 9. Aftermath. The screaming stopped after 10 minutes. Though it felt like hours, Elena sat with her back against the wall, the iron dagger loose in her hand, watching shadows recede into corners and cracks. The house had fed, she didn't know how else to describe it, and now settled back into stillness. Satisfied, 3 of Cordelia's vampires were dead, truly dead. Their bodies, desiccated husks, scattered across the ruined library. Cordelia herself had escaped through sheer age and power, fleeing with the 2 remaining members of her squad through a gap in the defenses before the house could fully seal itself. Lucian knelt in the center of the destruction, his head bowed, breathing hard despite not needing to breathe. Blood covered him, his own, mostly black but streaked with red where claws had torn deep enough to matter. Elena pushed herself upright on shaking legs and crossed to him. Lucian. He looked up, and his eyes were still fully black, pupils blown wide with the aftermath of blood magic and violence. For a heartbeat, Elena's instincts screamed danger. Then recognition flickered across his face, and the blackness receded to amber. You're hurt, he said hoarsely. So are you. Elena touched her throat where bruises were already forming in the shape of fingers. We need to. She didn't finish. Lucian caught her hand and pulled her down to him, his arms wrapping around her with desperate strength. He buried his face against her shoulder, and Elena felt him shudder once, violently, as if something inside him had finally broken. I could have lost you, he whispered against her hair. When she had you by the throat, when I couldn't reach you fast enough but you did reach me. Elena's hands came up tentatively, resting against his back. He was cold, always cold, but solid and real and alive in whatever way vampires were alive. I'm here. We both are. They stayed like that for a long moment, wrapped together in the wreckage, while the house creaked and settled around them. Elena felt Lucian's grip gradually loosen, his control reasserting itself. When he pulled back, his expression had shuddered again but not completely. Something had changed. You shouldn't have exposed yourself, he said, but there was no anger in it. Throwing candelabras at Cordelia bought you time to activate the house's defenses. Nearly got you killed, but didn't. Elena managed a weak smile. You're welcome, by the way. Lucian laughed sharp and disbelieving, the same sound he'd made when she'd first picked up the iron poker. You're impossible. So I've been told. He stood, pulling her up with him, and they surveyed the damage together. The library was destroyed, books torn, shelves collapsed, blood and glass everywhere. The 3 vampire corpses were already beginning to deteriorate, turning to ash and bone. The house will cleanse itself by dawn, Lucian said quietly. But Cordelia escaped. She'll report back to Mordain that we're defended, that we have access to old magic. He'll send more next time. Many more. Then we prepare. Elena's voice was steadier than she felt. You said there were other defenses, other protections. There are. But Elena, he turned to face her fully, his expression grave. This was just a raid. When Mordain commits to full assault, he'll bring the entire house. Dozens of vampires, some nearly as old as me. Even with the house's magic, we can't withstand that. Then what do we do? Lucian was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. We stop running, he said finally. We take the fight to them. Elena's breath caught. You mean I challenge Mordain directly. Invoke the old law's single combat for grievance. If I win, his house must withdraw. If I lose, he stopped. If you lose, you die and they take me anyway. Elena's hands clenched. That's not a plan. That's suicide. It's the only way to end this without more bloodshed. Lucian's jaw was set. Mordain won't stop until one of us is dead. At least this way, it's settled by law, rather than massacre. And if he cheats? If his house doesn't honor the outcome? Then the other houses will intervene. The Night Court's entire structure depends on covenant law being respected. If Mordain breaks it publicly, he loses everything. Lucian paused. It's a risk. But it's the best option we have. Elena wanted to argue, to find another way, but exhaustion and fear were catching up to her. Her hands trembled, her throat ached, and the adrenaline that had carried her through the fight was draining away, leaving only the weight of what had happened. I need to sit, she said quietly. Lucian guided her to the one chair still upright, then disappeared briefly, returning with a decanter of brandy from somewhere in the house's depths. He poured her a generous measure. Drink, he said. It'll help with the shock. Elena obeyed, grimacing at the burn. Lucian watched her with an expression she was learning to recognize, concern mixed with something deeper, something he kept trying to hide. Why do you care so much? She asked suddenly. About me specifically. You've lived to centuries. You've known thousands of humans. Why does it matter if I live or die? Lucian settled on the floor before her, his movements careful. When he spoke, his voice was raw with honesty. Because you're the first person in 100 years who's looked at me and seen both the monster and the man and didn't run from either. He met her eyes. You handed me iron when I was vulnerable. You stayed when you could have hidden. You fought for me when any sane person would have saved themselves. You make me believe that mercy wasn't a mistake. That choosing to be better than what I am might actually mean something. Elena's throat tightened. Lucian, I care because you make me want to survive this, he continued. Not just exist. Not just endure, but actually live. And I haven't felt that way since before Catherine died. He smiled sadly. So yes, Elena Thornwood, you matter. More than you should. More than is wise. More than I can afford. But you do. The confession hung between them, weighted with everything they hadn't said. Everything that couldn't be said between a mortal woman and a vampire who'd kidnapped her to save her life. Elena reached out, her fingers brushing his cheek, cold skin, sharp bones, inhumanly beautiful. Then we survive this together, she said. No suicide missions. No martyrdom. We find a way that doesn't end with either of us dead. And if there isn't one, then we make one. Her smile was fierce despite her exhaustion. I've gotten rather attached to you, Lucian Ashford. I'm not letting you go without a fight. His hand came up to cover hers, holding it against his face. Stubborn, he murmured, always. Outside, dawn was approaching. They could feel it, Elena in her bones, Lucian in the lethargy that crept through his limbs. But for now, they sat together in the ruins of the library, bound by something neither could name, but both recognized. Trust. Partnership. The beginning of something that might have been love, if either of them survived long enough to discover it. Chapter 10. The Shoyseth Challenge was delivered at sunset. 3 days later, Elena stood beside Lucian on the steps of Blackthorn Hall, watching a vampire she didn't recognize approach under a flag of truce white silk that gleamed against the darkening sky. He was young by vampire standards, perhaps only a century turned, and he carried himself with the rigid formality of a messenger who knew his life depended on protocol. Lucian Ashford, formerly of House Ashford, he intoned. Lord Mordain of House Mordain accepts your challenge. Single combat, 3 nights hence, at the ruins of Ravencross Abbey. Witnessed by representatives of all 5 houses. Terms. Standard covenant law. Victor claims grievance settled. Loser accepts final death, accepted. Lucian said calmly. The messenger's gaze flicked to Elena, lingering on the iron dagger at her belt, the bruises still fading on her throat. Lord Mordain requests the human be present. As witness to the settlement. Denied, Lucian said immediately. She has no part in this. She has every part. The messenger's expression remained carefully neutral. She is the grievance's origin, the witness to forbidden mercy, the human who fought House Mordain's soldiers. Lord Mordain insists she watch the consequences of your choices. Elena felt ice slide down her spine. Mordain wanted her there to watch Lucian die, to see what her survival had cost. Cruelty wrapped in legality. I'll go, she said, before Lucian could refuse again. Elena, he's right. This started because of me. I should be there. She met Lucian's eyes, willing him to understand. Besides, you're going to win. The messenger departed without ceremony, and they stood together in the gathering dark. The weight of 3 days pressing down like a physical thing. You shouldn't come, Lucian said quietly. We've established I'm terrible at doing what I should. He almost smiled. Then his expression turned serious. If I lose, if Mordain kills me, you run. Immediately. Don't wait for permission or ceremony. The other houses will protect you if you reach them before Mordain does, but only if you move fast. You're not going to lose. Elena, he caught her hands, his grip cold and careful. I'm old, but Mordain is older, stronger. He's spent 5 centuries perfecting violence, while I've spent mine trying to avoid it. The odds aren't in my favor. Then we change the odds. Elena's mind was already racing. You said covenant law governs the combat. What are the exact rules? Over the next 3 days, they prepared. Lucian trained with renewed intensity, pushing his body through forms and techniques he'd learned across centuries. Elena researched, poring over every text in Blackthorn Hall's library about vampire combat traditions, looking for loopholes, advantages, anything that might tip the scales. She found it on the second night, in a crumbling volume written in medieval French. Iron, she said, bursting into the ballroom where Lucian was training. Combatants can't bring iron weapons, it's considered dishonorable. But witnesses can carry them for protection. Lucian stopped mid-movement. Witnesses can't interfere in the combat. Doing so would void the challenge and give Mordain legal right to kill us both, but they can defend themselves if attacked by third parties. Elena's eyes gleamed. What if Mordain's people decide to grab me during the fight? What if I need to protect myself? Understanding dawned across Lucian's face. You want to create a situation where you have grounds to use iron near the combat zone. I want to be prepared for every possibility. Elena set the book down. I can't fight for you, Lucian, but I can make sure the fight is fair. And if Mordain tries anything beyond covenant law, you'll have iron ready. He crossed to her, cupping her face with both hands. You're devious. I appreciate that. I'm desperate, Elena corrected. There's a difference. The night before the challenge, they sat together in the library now cleaned by the house's strange magic, every trace of battle erased. Elena had tried to sleep and failed. Lucian had stopped pretending to need rest at all. Tell me about the world, Elena said suddenly. The one you've seen. 200 years of it. So he did. He told her about revolutions and transformations, about gaslight giving way to electricity, about empires falling and rising. He told her about the Night Court's hidden influence on human affairs, the careful manipulations that kept vampire society secret. He spoke of beauty he'd witnessed, art and music, and human resilience that had moved him despite his undead heart, and slowly, tentatively, he told her about the future. He'd stopped letting himself imagine one where he wasn't alone, where mercy wasn't weakness, where a human woman with fierce eyes and stubborn courage had reminded him why immortality might be worth enduring. If I survive tomorrow, he said quietly. If Mordain is defeated and the houses accept settlement, what then, Elena? You've seen what I am, what I'm capable of, what this life means. You can't stay here forever. Elena had been asking herself the same question for days. Her old life in London was gone even if she returned. The scandal and whispers would follow her forever. But staying here, in this house of shadows, with a vampire who'd become something more than captor, more than ally. Ask me, she said, Lucien's brow furrowed. Ask you what? What you want to ask? What? You've been dancing around since I handed you that iron ring. Elena turned to face him fully. I can see it in the way you look at me, in how carefully you maintain distance, even when you don't want to. Ask. He was silent for a long moment. Then, stay, not as prisoner, or victim, or obligation. Stay because you choose to. Stay because his voice roughened. Because I've lived to centuries alone, and I don't want to anymore. Not if you're the alternative. Elena's breath caught. That's not a small thing you're asking. I know. My life would be here, in shadows, hidden from the human world. Aging while you don't, yes, and eventually dying while you continue, yes. Pain flickered across his face. I wouldn't ask you to turn. That choice must be freely made if ever. But Elena, even a human lifetime with you would be worth the grief that follows. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. This beautiful, deadly creature who'd kidnapped her to save her, who'd chosen mercy over law, who'd made her feel alive for the first time since London had chewed her up and spit her out. He was offering her a future she'd never imagined wanting. Ask me again tomorrow, she said softly. After you've won. After we know what future we actually have. Lucien nodded, understanding. Then he pulled her close, and they sat together in the firelit library, holding each other against the uncertainty of what dawn would bring. 3 nights hence arrived too quickly. Ravencross Abbey loomed against the night sky, Gothic arches open to stars, stones ancient and moss-covered, beautiful in its decay. Representatives from all 5 houses stood in a circle around the central nave, vampires in formal clothing, their faces impassive, their eyes gleaming with predatory interest, and in the center, Lord Mordain waited. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with silver hair and eyes like ice. Power radiated from him in waves that made Elena's skin prickle even from the witness section. This was what 5 centuries of vampirism created, something barely recognizable as having once been human. Lucien entered the circle, and Elena's heart clenched. He looked small compared to Mordain, more elegant than powerful, beautiful rather than terrifying, but his eyes were steady, and when they found hers across the space, they held no fear. The eldest vampire present, a woman who'd introduced herself as Lady Ashford, Lucien's own former house head, stepped forward to recite the terms. Single combat. First to deal final death. Witnesses bound to non-interference. Begin, she said, and stepped back. Mordain moved first, a blur of violence that crossed the space in a heartbeat. Lucien met him with precision rather than strength, deflecting rather than blocking. Using centuries of skill to compensate for the difference in power, they fought with inhuman speed, too fast for Elena to fully track. She saw impacts that should have shattered bones, recovered from in seconds. Saw blood black in the moonlight, spattering ancient stones. Saw Lucien driven back, step by step, toward the edge of the circle. Then she saw Cordelia moving through the crowd toward her, eyes glinting with malice. Looks like your champion is losing, Cordelia purred. Pity. I was hoping he'd last longer. Elena's hand moved to the iron dagger at her belt. Stay back. Or what? You'll stab me? In front of all 5 houses? Cordelia laughed. You can't interfere, little human. All you can do is watch him die. But Cordelia kept advancing, and Elena remembered Lucien's words. Witnesses can defend themselves if attacked. She drew the dagger. I said stay back. Cordelia lunged not at Elena, but past her, toward the combat circle. As if to interfere. As if to give Elena legal grounds to act. Elena didn't hesitate. She threw the iron dagger with all her strength. It wasn't aimed at the combat that would void the challenge. But it flew close enough that Lucien saw it, silver in the moonlight, and understood. He moved, using Mordain's momentum against him. Lucien spun them both directly into the dagger's path. The iron blade meant for Cordelia buried itself in Mordain's back. The ancient vampire screamed, smoke rising from the wound. Lucien didn't waste the opening. His hand shot out, fingers hardening to claws, and tore through Mordain's throat in one savage motion. Silence fell across Ravencross Abbey. Mordain collapsed, his body already beginning to deteriorate. Lucien stood over him, breathing hard, covered in blood, victor by covenant law. Lady Ashford stepped forward, her expression unreadable. The challenge is settled. Lucien Ashford claims victory. House Mordain's grievance is void. Her gaze swept the assembled vampires. Let it be witnessed and recorded. This matter is closed. One by one, the House representatives nodded and departed, melting into shadows. Cordelia fled without a word, her position now precarious without Mordane's protection. Elena ran to Lucian, catching him as his legs finally gave out. You did it, she gasped. You won. We won, he corrected, his smile exhausted and real. That dagger throw was perfectly legal witness self-defense, Elena finished. I checked, he laughed, the sound edged with relief and disbelief, and pulled her close. Around them, Raven Crossaby stood witness to something the Night Court hadn't seen in centuries, mercy vindicated, love acknowledged, and a future suddenly, impossibly within reach. So, Lucian said against her hair. About that question, Elena pulled back just enough to meet his eyes amber in the moonlight, human and inhuman at once. Looking at her with something that might have been hope. Yes, she said simply. I'll stay. Not as prisoner or victim, but as partner. As yours, if you'll be mine, always, Lucian whispered, and kissed her beneath the ruined arches, while the night looked on. 3 months later, Elena stood at Blackthorn Hall's entrance, watching the sunset paint the moors in gold and crimson. Behind her, the house hummed with contentment, its master no longer alone, its halls no longer silent. Lucian emerged from the library, moving to stand beside her. Ready? For what? The Night Court has requested our presence. Formally. He smiled. Seems they want to discuss new covenant laws. About consent. About mercy. About humans having agency in vampire affairs. Elena's eyes widened. You're serious. You changed everything, Elena. The moment you picked up that iron poker, you proved humans aren't helpless. Now they want to negotiate. He took her hand. Together? Elena looked out at the darkening landscape, the world she'd run from, transformed into one she'd chosen. Then she looked at the vampire beside her, who'd given her back her courage, her purpose, her life. Together, she agreed. And they walked into the night side by side, mortal and immortal, human and vampire, partners in every way that mattered. The house sighed contentedly behind them, and for the first time in centuries, Blackthorn Hall felt like a home rather than a monument. Some endings, it seemed, were really beginnings.